Welcome everyone to Microsoft Excel Graphs and Pivot Tables. This is the final in a series of classes here at Wichita Public Library. And my name is Ben Romp. I'm a technology trainer here at the Advanced Learning Library in downtown Wichita. And I'm being assisted by Brock Rhodes, another tech trainer here. If you have any questions at any time in the class, please post those in the chat. And if I don't see them, Brock will bring them to my attention. And feel free to post any questions at any time. So this is graphs and pivot tables. So something that graphs and pivot tables have in common is that they're both ways of representing data visually. Well, or not so much visually, but as data summary tools to give. And for the case of charts and graphs, we can do a visual representation. Pivot tables are a summary. But we can also make a chart or graph of a pivot table, and we'll be doing that before the end of class. So just a quick review. I'm going to click on my Excel file here to open up this workbook. The workbook name is Graphs and Pivot Tables. That's in the Google Drive folder. And so again, we have a workbook is the whole file, and we have several worksheets within this file. The first one we're starting with is the branch sales, and there's one called sheet 3, book sales by genre, and then auto inventory, which may be familiar from those of you who were in the class last week. And so we're going to be working with that again. Other terminology, we have rows and columns. Intersection between those two is a cell. The active cell is highlighted green. We've got the ribbon across the top with that's organized into tabs, and then within each tab of the ribbon we have groups with the name. And in addition to the Home tab today, we'll be looking at the Insert tab. I'll go ahead and click on that. See, this is where our recommended charts, and a graph and a chart are the same thing. They're just two different words. Excel calls them charts. I called them graphs in the title of the class. And so there's all kinds of things we can insert into our table. We'll be working with charts. You can also add illustrations, so you can put in a picture and shapes and whatnot, all kinds of things. But we'll be doing the charts today. And the other thing I'm going to be talking about a little bit is what we call contextual tabs, which is in certain context, such as when we add a chart or graph, a new tab will pop up on the ribbon relating to that feature. And we call that a contextual tab. So when is it appropriate to use a graph? So a graph gives you a visual representation of your data. So it's very helpful in presentations, and it works best when you have two axes of information. You have so X and Y coordinates. If it's more, then that's where pivot tables become useful, because you can pivot your information and look at it in different contexts. So to start, just as when we were sorting and filtering with a graph, we're gonna click on a link on the tab on the ribbon to insert something, but we have to have some piece of our data selected to start with. If I go over to the blank space here and try to insert a chart, it's just a blank. It's just a blank because I haven't selected any data. So Excel is very literal minded. If I select a blank cell and say add a chart, it's going to add a blank chart. And then to delete that, I'm just going to click on it to highlight it, and then hit the delete button, and it's gone. So first you want to have click somewhere on your data. And then we'll go up to the Insert tab. And we'll take a second to look at some of the different types of charts we have. And you notice if we hover over the buttons for the different types of charts, we have a little pop-up that gives us an example and a description. So the first one is the column or bar chart. That's one of the probably the most common type of chart you'll see. In this case, we want to know, we have in our data here, we have branch sales for 3 branches of a chain. And let's say we're looking for, we want to insert a graph to show the earnings for all the stores in Denver for last year. So that's pretty much what our chart shows. We have the year separated by months, and we have monthly earnings for each store. So which chart do you think will be good? Let's just go ahead and start. And if I click mouse over the line chart, the pie chart, I get a little description. The book column or bar chart says use this chart to visually compare values across a few categories. Well, that sounds like exactly what we're doing. So I'll go ahead and click there, and I have some choices here. And now as I mouse over the different types, I have an immediate visual preview of my chart. So you have the 2D column, the 3D columns. These are all different column or bar charts. I'm just gonna select the 2D column. Well, let's keep it. I don't want the stacked column just yet. Let's look at just the basic clustered column.
Hey Ben,
Yes.
we have a request in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let's make your Excel sheet take the entire screen up so that I can see it on my small tablet. Okay. Let me come over here. I'll just say a word about the PowerPoint here. It's we'll show some screenshots from what we're doing, and I don't think let me just jump through. So yeah, there's a couple of things that I will probably come back to for the pivot tables, but we'll go ahead and maximize our window here. We will actually need the room for the chart. I will go ahead and zoom in as well. so that everything looks so slightly bigger here. Now, right now our chart is covering up some of our table, our data. So if you notice if you remember from before, the different types of mouse cursors we have, the default being the fat plus, which is the selection cursor. When I mouse over this chart while it's selected, I've got the four-way arrow chart, the four-way arrow cursor, the move cursor. So if I click and drag that, it will move my chart, so I can move it so it's not covering up other data on the page. And similarly, these little circles around the edges, as you see, as I mouse over those, my cursor changes to two-way arrows, and each one points in different directions. So I can click, if I take a corner and drag it down, I can adjust the width and the height. And since I have room, I'm going to make it even wider here to spread our data out a little bit so we can see it better. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is the contextual tabs. So notice if you look up on the ribbon, we're on a brand new tab that's under a heading called Chart Tools, and we have a Design and a Format tab. And these are brand new that popped up as soon as we inserted the chart. And notice with all contextual tools, when I point Excel away from the feature that the tab is referring to, then the tab disappears. So if I click in a blank space down here, B19, the ribbon goes back to normal, and there's no tab for the chart. I have to click back on my data. I actually have to click on the chart itself for the Chart Tools tabs to show up on the ribbon. And I'm still looking at the Home tab, but you can see the Chart Tools here at the top at the end of the list of tabs. So let's see, we covered resizing the chart. So all of the features here I can click on, and notice the chart title. If I click on it, suddenly that it becomes a text box, and if I highlight the text in there, and actually I can move it around for one thing, but when I mouse over the text, my cursor changes to the text selection cursor, that sort of I bar, what they call the I bar. And I'm going to highlight that and change the name to 2019 store earnings. Let me go back and capitalize that, make it look good. And while we're at it, why don't we bold it? Notice I have a contextual menu here that gives me some font display options. I'm going to use that to bold, but I can also go back to my Home tab, and I have the same tools up here in the font group on the Home tab. I'm going to click away so I can see what that looks like, and now it doesn't look like it's centered. Anyway, so I can move it around. I can format the text exactly as I want it. I'm going to go back to my Design tab on the ribbon for the Chart Tools, the Design, and there's some really handy things here. In this, there's a Chart Styles group that has different chart styles, and as I just mouse over those, the chart changes. That black background or sort of gray background really makes the data jump out. I like that one. But you see, as I mouse over, you can see lots of different styles, and you have complete control over every aspect of the display of this data in this chart. Okay, I'm just gonna select one. That's another one, kind of almost a pastel. And then there's this change colors button. That's a drop-down menu, chart quick colors. And you see each of these, as I mouse over, it changes the colors. Each one is a palette of colors. It's a group of colors. And then there's some down here that are monochromatic. If you're printing in black and white, the monochromatic will work, but honestly, they don't work so well in this view. Let me switch to a different graph and see if they look better. So it's slightly better maybe with a different chart style. But we've got color. Oh, and there's a black and white version. So that could work if you're not able to print in color and you're wanting to print this. Okay, I see a question. Is there a way to center the chart title within the table? Well, let's see. If I select it, I don't think so. Well, let me see. Here we go. I can align. I think if I think it started out being centered. What I'm going to do is copy my data title that I did and then delete the title and then go over to this plus sign of chart elements and click on chart title again. And now it should be centered. Now I'm going to be careful not to move it. Triple click to select everything. Delete that and paste in the title that I just did. So it should be centered there. When I moved it, I ruined it. So I had to take it out and put it back. It should be automatically centered. So there's all kinds of choices to make with I was looking on the format chart, which has these aligning options, which lets you align things in the middle, but this is for aligning a group of items. So I thought there might be a center option there, but it doesn't, but it does default to the center. So let's come back. What else do we have control over? So that was a good segue. Okay, I clicked off of my title and back into the blank space of my chart so that I could get these little buttons that pop up on the side. And the plus sign at the top is chart elements, and they're check boxes. And you see I've already got axes, chart title, grid lines, and a legend. The legend is the color key down here at the bottom that tells which colors represent which stores. And as I mouse over these, so there's the data labels. The data labels just puts the value for each chart element on the chart, which is pretty messy. The data table just adds a version of the full table below the chart itself. So if I wanted to print, that's another way to show the table as well as the chart, but in a more integrated way. Error bars doesn't really apply to this group. And then there's trend lines, I would have to select one of the stores to specify which one to display, and there's lots of other options. In this paintbrush group is the chart styles, and these are the same options that we have up above on the ribbon. As always with Microsoft Office programs, there's 2 or 3 or 4 ways to do most everything. And then this button, what does that look like? That looks like a filter. And so indeed it is a chart filter. That gives me a pop-up window with check marks. I can specify only certain data with that. We'll come back to that later. So let's see. So what kind of chart would be good for comparing the income of locations for a single month? I'm going to go ahead and delete this chart. You know, we worked so hard on it, but it's easy to replace. I'm going to just delete it. And I just selected that and hit the delete button. I'm going to click in my data and insert a different kind of chart. There's this recommended charts. Excel, the most recent versions of Excel have really gotten good at helping you out, doing a lot of the work for you. So here are recommended charts. Here is a line chart, which is interesting. It shows the sequential earnings of each store as a line chart. The stacked area chart has an interesting 3D effect. So let's see. You know what? If we're comparing the total sales for a single month, I think a pie chart works really well. So let's try that. I'm going to click OK and move this up a little. Make it a little bigger. So this is not really the data that I wanted to find. So I've got the months of the year as separate elements of the pie, but I want to make the different stores. So I have the row titles showing different elements of the pie. I want to make the different the column headings as the elements of the pie. So luckily there's a really easy way to do this, which is up on the ribbon. And again, I'm in the design tab for the chart tools, and there's a switch row and column data. Let's say we're looking for the March sales. We want to compare the 3 stores just for the month of March. I'm going to click on switch column rows. Now we have the columns being represented, the columns from the chart being represented as elements of my pie chart. So this is a great way to see, like, the specific numbers are not being shown here, but I could actually fix that. But what it shows really well, a pie chart that is the percentage of the whole that each part makes. So you can see the Lakewood store makes up almost half of the sales for the month of January. Okay, so we wanted to look at March. So up on the ribbon again, and actually this is in the data group on the design tab of the chart tools. along with the switch row column data, I have a select data button. And when I click on that, I have some checkboxes, and I have there's a switch row and column button here, which lets me swap these out. And I can unselect, let's say, January and February, and see that should show March. And I click OK. Now we've got March sales. Now, like I said, this shows really well the percentage of the whole that each part has, but it doesn't show the actual numbers. But that's something that we can add. If we go up to the chart titles, chart elements here, let's see, data labels, there we go. There, now I have the numbers for the data labels printed on top, and I'm gonna see if I can make those bold. There we go, and I can make them a little bigger too. Now, because they were really hard to see before, but now you can maybe kind of see them. So that's a nice representation of the sales by store for March, and just to see which one had the highest percentage, which looks like it was the Aurora store, the red one here. And it also is maybe helpful to see the actual number for those figures.
We have a question in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Can you have a line graph on top of bar chart? Okay, well, let's try that. So coming back to my, let's see, the design tab on the ribbon. I can change, there's actually a change chart type here. Let's go back to the column chart. Short answer to the question is I'm not sure, and I don't think so, but we might be able to combine them. So we switch back to the bar chart, and we need to switch our column data. I'm going to go back up to select data again and see now. I can use the switch row column data here, and if let me click OK. So that's better. Let me take out these data labels, make it look a mess in this view. So I can just turn those off that way. And with the trend lines, you have to select one. So now I've got a trend line for the Denver store, which is a dotted line here. In this case, it's not a very useful visual representation to me. But I don't think that's what you were asking. You wanted, let's see, do we have more options? Just those. I'm gonna turn that back off. The only way I think we might be able to do it is to make a second chart and superimpose it. So there's a combo chart open. Let's see, where was, oh, I see, there it is, combo. Thank you. clustered column line. Let's try that. So this is showing Denver and Aurora stores as bars with Lakewood as a line. Go back to change chart. Okay, I see. So this lets me do some data with one style and other data in another style. Secondary axis. So that kind of combines the two, but it doesn't, I don't think that's what you were getting after. Let's go back to the column chart. Just real quick, I'm gonna try something. I don't want to spend too much time, but I'm gonna take a line chart and superimpose it. But what I think I need to do, okay, I double clicked the blank space behind in the back of the chart, and that brought up this format chart area. I think another way to do that is to, if I come over here, let's see, going to more options, breaks in, that's the axis title. I'm gonna, if I double click on the chart area, I can format it and I can make the fill no fill. And that superimposes both charts with, no, it's a mess. Okay, let's see. So that kind of gets at it. That doesn't really work. I'd have to work at this a little bit. I want to maybe take the lines out. I can change this, make this wider so that it looks similar. It follows the same patterns. I want to take out the grid lines. Here, I'm just kind of getting there. So, so I can have a line graph on top of the bar chart. Literally, I'm superimposing two charts, one on top of the other. One thing I'd have to fix is you can see the value on the right-hand side going from 10,000 to 9,000 is on a different scale than the ones on the left. So I would want to move that. I can extend it and adjust it by just clicking and dragging. So it's a lot of work, but it's very possible. And I had to make the background of one of the charts with no fill. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that chart. Notice if I click in the background here, you have there's a pattern fill. The gradient fill is actually really nice there. I can, but I can change the colors. I can, I have really unlimited control over this. There's different types of There's gradient stops. I can have a combination of colors, degree of transparency, brightness, etc. You could spend hours or days getting your chart to look exactly right. How do I get the format plot area to come up as I had X'd it out earlier? Format plot area. I think it's a double click in the plot area. So if I close that and double click in the plot area, the format plot area sidebar pops up. Okay. So if I wanted to get a pie chart for each month and put that in a report, I would have to insert a separate chart for each month and use the pie chart in the select data option to get a pie chart for each month. And one thing I'm noticing here that you may not notice here because the, let's see, there's no axis labels. If I want the months on the bottom here, there we go, primary horizontal. And now you can see that I'm missing January and February. So I go back up to my select data and recheck the boxes for January and February to put those back. There's one other type of chart I wanted to demonstrate before we move on to pivot tables, and that is the stacked bar chart. So this is interesting because on the one chart, it was good. The pie chart is good for showing the percentages of the whole. The bar chart is good for showing the values relative to each other. But the stacked bar chart does both. So if I go to chart type and then choose a stacked column, and just because it's kind of cool, I'm going to do the 3D stacked column in this black format, which I kind of like make it a little bigger. So this actually, it doesn't really give you the relative values from month to month, but it shows you the percentage of the whole for each month separately. So that's a stacked column chart. And are there any other questions about charts and graphs? One thing I might do, well, if I think we'll move on to pivot tables if nobody has other questions. I think one of the things that is useful in studying Excel is using multiple examples. So if you use just one example, then it's great to give you an idea of a thing, but when you look at a second example or multiple examples, then you kind of get a vision of the dynamics of it. So on sheet 3 here is a version of the chart that the Denver library did. This lesson plan, I should mention, is based in Denver Public Library, which has the class materials for all of its classes freely available online. But I would be remiss not to give them credit where it's due, in that they've done an excellent job with these lesson plans. So this was part of the sample that they supplied on their site. Maybe we can come back to this. This is, well, now go ahead and do it. This is a different set of data. We have, so this is, imagine a bookstore that has figures for the 2008 to 2012, and it has the sales by genre of all of the fiction titles in their collection. So we have classics, mystery, romance, sci-fi, and fantasy, and young adult over 5 years. And so in order to insert a table, insert a chart or graph, I'm going to go to the insert column. I've clicked in my data somewhere, so I can insert, and we'll look at the recommended charts. Just since we didn't really use it the last time, let's do a line chart. I'll go ahead and click OK. And I'm gonna click and drag a corner to make this more larger. So this, all of these separate worksheets are part of the same workbook that was available for download in the Google Drive folder. It's the workbook called Charts and Graphs and Pivot Tables. I'm on the worksheet named Book Sales by Genre. So when you're looking at the data here just by itself, it's hard to get a grip on exactly any of the trends that might have happened. But when you place it in a graph, in a line chart, then certain trends become obvious. So what were the worst months of the year for most categories, or rather, what were the worst categories? Now wait a second. Okay, so I had it backwards in my mind. We've got each line is a different year, and that's not really what I want. So what do I need to do? I need to swap the row and column data. So I'm going to go up to the Design tab, the ribbon, and switch row and column data. Now I've got the time values, the years, going on the x-axis and the values on the y-axis. That makes more sense to me. So we can say what was the best year and what was the worst year. It looks like 2009 was maybe the best year, and 2011 was kind of a low point for most genres. So again, I can change the look of my data, change the colors. I can add chart elements. So up in addition to the plus sign on the side here, where I have my chart elements, I also have it on the ribbon here. There's an add chart element drop down, and each one of these has a secondary arrow over that gives me different options. And if I click on more options, it's going to open the sidebar over here with all the details about the each element. So this is the format, the data labels. I can change the label position. I can include what is included in each label. So I have lots of control over all the elements. These data labels on the charts don't always look very great, so I'm gonna take them off. None. Okay, now they're gone. Okay, so that's another chart, some different data. Now let's move on to pivot tables. So pivot table, I'm gonna jump back to, well, let's look at the next worksheet. So we have auto inventory. This is the inventory of a used car lot. We have Fords and Toyotas from 2013 and 2014. We have cars, trucks, and SUVs, and we have the model names for each vehicle, and we have a price, and we have a date received. And so if I showed you this data and said, what's the average cost of a Ford car on your lot? You would have to like spend some time to do some math and pull out data, but what a pivot table would let you do is get that answer almost instantly with just a few clicks. The pivot table is one of the most powerful tools that Excel offers for summarizing complex groups of data. This is a relatively small set of data, but it's sufficiently complex that it's not easy to pull out the numbers. When we did the formulas and functions, we created a formula. We used, for instance, the sum if function, and that let us let's see, sum if we had a range and a criteria and a sum range, so that we could say that give me a total for all the cars. That's what the sum if did it. So we took the range from the type. We said the criteria is car in quotes, and then we said the sum range is the price. So for each car, we're going to add up the price and get a total. And I put close parentheses, enter. And there's my so this was a relatively simple formula that pulls out the value for each car and adds it together into one column. So, and then we could format that as accounting or currency. We'll do currency. And then I could label it here. I'd have to say car inventory and resize that, and I misspelled it. So, and we got a lot of data from that, but what all these lessons, there's one of the themes is finding a shortcut where Excel does the work for you. Now it's important to know how to write formulas and create and work with these functions to pull out things very specifically. But if we want to summarize this data, the most powerful tool we have is a pivot table. So the pivot table we insert from the Insert tab. So first, if I insert a pivot table from here for H3, there's not going to be anything there because there's no data in H3. So I'm going to select a piece of my data and go to Insert Pivot Table. Now I have a pop-up window and it's saying create pivot table, choose the data you want to analyze. Excel has very smartly, again, as always, guessed where my data is, and it said, oh, okay, there's this bunch of contiguous data that's in a tabular format. This must be what the data is you're looking at, and indeed it is. And then it says choose where you want the pivot table to be placed, and it defaults to a new worksheet. So currently I'm in the worksheet called Auto Inventory. I'm going to keep it for select, put it on a new worksheet, and that just puts it on a separate page so it's a little neater. And I'm going to click OK. So immediately, if you look down on the sheet tabs, it's added a sheet called Sheet 1, and it's put my pivot table there, and there's nothing there yet. But way over on the right, I have a sidebar that says Pivot Table Fields. And so there's a couple of, as always, there's more than one way to do this. But let's say we wanted to know the average price of a Ford car on the lot. So let's say we want to include brand. So I'm going to check off brand. And when I do that, it puts brand in the rows group here down below. And suddenly I have beginning of a table with two rows, one named Ford and one named Toyota. All right, then I'm going to go down and I'm going to check off type. And when I check off type, I've got type in the rows group again, and I have my Fords and Toyotas separated by type. And I want to know, I'm going to work with the price, so I'm going to click on price. And down below, I have sum of price suddenly appeared in the values box. And over in my table here, I've got a sum of price field for each category. So already, with just a few clicks, I have the subtotals of all of the data that we worked on with those formulas, with the sum if formulas to say add up all the cars. And here I've got all the Ford cars added up. I got all the Fords added up, and I have a grand total for everything. And so the key here is I did it the easiest way, which was to just check off the boxes that I wanted to include here. But the way this works, and one of the reasons it's called a pivot table, is because it's really easy to pivot the data. So right now I have brand on top of rows in my rows group. And that's why over here I have Ford subdivided by type, and then Toyota subdivided by type. So I have car, SUV, truck for the Fords, and I have the same for Toyotas. Now, if I go down here, you notice when I mouse over the type in the rows group here, I've got the move cursor with the 4 arrows. That means I can move that. I can move it anywhere I want in this grid here. And incidentally, if I move it off of here, notice that it makes a little X sign, and that would be to delete it. But I'm just gonna move it above brand. I'm just moving it above, and then look over at my data now. Now I have the type is on top of brand. So the type is the top level category. And then with each type, I have Fords and Toyotas. So now I have a sum of price for all my cars. And then I've got your Ford cars, your Toyota cars. And then I have a sum for all my SUVs, and then separated by Ford and Toyota. So all I did was drag one above the other, and it changed the data exactly the way it looks in my pivot table. So right now I'm going to jump out to my PowerPoint and show you something. So here's some of the graphs and charts slides that we did. So here is a pivot table areas diagram. And I think I got this from GCF Learn Free. And it shows a pivot table on the left, and on the right, it shows that the 4 categories of filters, columns, rows, and values. And so each of these elements was from the column headings in my data and my row labels. So I'm gonna jump back to my data, and let's add an element. So we have rows and we have values. Let's say I add the year. If I check off year, it adds year to the columns group. And now I have looks kind of, should have 2 years. Let me pull out one of these. I'm going to take the type out, so we just have the Fords and Toyotas. Oh, you know what I put this ended up wrong. Let's see. How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to put year in the columns field and put price back in the values field. Now I'm going to resize these columns so that they look a little better. And I'm going to zoom in a little. Some of you have small screens. So here's my pivot table. I've got the brand in the rows. So I have one row for each brand. I got a Ford row and a Toyota row. And I have the year in the columns. So I have a column for 2013 and a column for 2014. Remember, my data has only those 2 years and those 2 brands. So this summarizes all of my data. And let's put type back in there. I'm going to drag type down and put it below brand in the rows group. And now I have a summary of my data by brand, type, year, and with the values, I'm working with the sum of the price. And the only thing I haven't used is the filters. So let's say we want to simplify it. We'll take brand out. And notice down here in the rows group, I'm clicking on brand and dragging it away. And notice how it has the little X there next to the cursor and it says brand. And then I'm going to release it. That effectively just deleted brand from my pivot table. And I can click and drag it back, and then I can click and drag it out again, just as easy as that, clicking and dragging. So now I've got my sum of cars by type and by year, and with grand totals, and grand totals for the year, as well as grand totals for the type, and then an overarching grand total. Now, if you think back to our beginning class when we did our budget, our annual household budget, we had to tell Excel to format our data as currency so that it showed the dollar signs and the commas and the decimal places. So that's missing from this. And one of the things that I have learned about pivot tables is that I can format this the way I would format anything by going up to the Home tab and using the Numbers tab. I can switch tabs on the ribbon at any time and have it apply to my data in my table. But what I learned is that there is a better way to format this data. I'm going to go back to my pivot table. And notice that on the ribbon, I have a pivot table tools group and 2 tabs of analyze and design, similar to we had with the chart tools. So the way that we want to format our numbers here is under the drop-down menu for the sum of price. There's a value field settings. Now that's one way to get to the value field settings. And if I click that, I've got a pop-up window and I've got the sum of price. And now down here, I can change the sum to count, average, max, min, product. And it goes, and the list goes on. There's all kinds of mathematical things that are beyond my understanding, but sum and count and average, I understand. But down here below, we have number format, and that's where we should change the format, because we're saying, give me the sum or the average. I could change it to average and then format in a particular way. And now the way I want to format is when I click that, I get the format cells pop up. I'm going to select currency. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click OK again. Now I switch this to average. So then I click OK. Now down here it says average of price instead of sum. And in my data, I have averages suddenly instead of sums. I'm going to spread the data out a little bit so it's a little more easier to see. So I've got my average prices. Let's go back to sum, because that was originally, although when I started, I asked about the average cost of Ford cars. So I'm not quite there yet. Okay, I had the sum, but now I have average, but I don't have the brand anywhere in my data here, but I've got brand up here and I can click, notice the move cursor, when I mouse over the brand in this group, I can drag it down. I could put it back in the rows, or I could put it in the filters group, which we haven't seen yet. When I click it, put it there, you may not see what happened, but notice there's a row missing. Because I've zoomed in, there's a row 1 now has the brand on it with the drop-down menu. And there's my Fords and Toyotas. I can select either one. I can hold down the control to select multiple. Actually, no, I have to click here to select multiple. But so I've got Ford, and then okay. Now I've got my average price of a Ford car on my lot. I've got a value for 2013 and 2014, and I have a grand total, which is going to be the average of both years, of all years. And there's my average price of a Ford car on my lot. Now, it took us a little time to get there because I'm trying not to overwhelm you. Pivot tables are really disorienting and confusing until you kind of get a handle. And at this point, I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint and show you this graphic again so you can see. And actually, I have another version of it here based on the model we just used, the spreadsheet we just used. So, and I've color coded, as in the previous graphic. My rows are in blue. I took the type into the rows field. So now the rows of my pivot table are made up of the different types. That's from the type column in the original data. And I've got brand in the columns in this example. So now instead of, in the other one, I put the year in the columns. Now I've got a column for Fords and a column for Toyotas. And then in this example, we have the year in the filters. So we just reversed the brand and year from the data before. And then in the meat of my pivot table, I have the sum of price for each category. Ford cars, whoops, didn't mean to click there. So I got my Ford car totals, Toyota car totals, and the grand total, etc. I'm going to jump back to our data. So right now we've got the data filtered. I'm going to select multiple items and click OK. And do Toyota and Ford. So now we have our totals, average price. To change this to look like the example in the PowerPoint, I just need to put year in the filters and brand in the columns. And now I've got a year filter at the top. I can select whichever year. I'm going to select all for now. I can also just click on all here. And those are, and then, so we're still on average of price. I'm going to go back down to the drop down for my average of price and go to value field settings. But before I actually follow through on that, I'm going to go back to my pivot table ribbon and look up in the top left of, this is the analyze ribbon. This is the main ribbon for my pivot table. I've got a pivot table name here in the first group. Second group, it says active field. And here's my field settings. That's the same thing that I got from the drop down over under average, over on the corner under average of price. My value field settings pop-up comes there. I can also get to it from the ribbon here, the field settings. Value field settings, the meat of my pivot table. I'm going to switch it back to sum, and the number format I'm leaving the same. Although actually I think I'm going to take off the decimal places because we really don't need it for these, for our purposes. So I'm just going to use this, there's this drop down menu for decimal places. I could just punch in a number. I'm just going to click that twice and make it 0. Click OK. Now I got sum, change the format, sum of price, click OK. Now I've got the sum of the totals with no decimal places so that my data looks a little cleaner. And I've got my year filter here. Now, if we go back to the PowerPoint, you can see the same data. Let me see, I've got car, truck, SUV, Ford, and Toyota. Yeah, I got the same numbers, 170,000 Ford cars for my total, 170,000 here. So this is a nice visual of what's going on with the pivot table. And to come back here, I'm gonna delete everything and start from scratch again. I've just unchecked all my values and I've got my pivot table. Notice it says to build a report, choose fields from the pivot table field list. And that's where we've got our pivot table fields on the right-hand sidebar. And what I have actually is a list of my column headings. Got brand, year, type, model, price, date received. So I have brand, year, type, model, price, and date received. These are all my column headings from my data, and I can click and drag them into any of these fields. Now, you may wonder, when we just check these off like this, it automatically puts stuff into certain year categories. I just checked them all off, and this is, we kind of ended up with kind of this, it looks a little messy. I'm going to zoom out a bit. You can see there's a lot that showed up there. I've got a sum of price and sum of year. I don't need the sum of year, so I'm going to click and drag that out. But now the year is missing, so I'll put the year back in columns. I thought if you, well, so it doesn't always work great if you just check them off. I've got brand, type, and model in the rows. I don't really need the model there because it just makes it a little bit, it's a little bit too much. I'm going to put year in columns. So how does it know where to put stuff when you check them off? And I discovered this on a video that we have here at the library called Discover Microsoft Excel. And the way that it works, let's see, I think I put it in my spreadsheet here. The pivot tables, let's see, I'm gonna split my screen here again. Oh, come on. When the selected fields are added to default areas, and that is non-numeric fields. Non-numeric fields are added to rows. So when we did brand and type and model, it put those in the rows group. Date and time hierarchies are added to columns. It actually tried to put year in the values. It did a sum of year, which makes no sense. So it's not always perfectly automated, but the year properly belongs in the columns, and not properly, but traditionally, because you can do whatever you want with these. But the date and time hierarchies are usually represented in the column field. That way you can have, well, it just kind of makes sense. And then any numeric fields get added to values. And then in this case, we have the price. So these are kind of traditional organization of a pivot table. But as I said, you can put anything anywhere. And so let me enlarge this again. I just kind of recreated, recreated our pivot table, but we lost the formatting. I'm going to go up to the Analyze Pivot Table tab and go to the field settings. That's where I want to change the format here. I can also use the drop down under price, sum of price. Since that's the element I'm changing, it kind of makes sense. The value field setting is there. The value field setting is the numerical value, which is the price. And so I can change the format here again. And I'm going to call it accounting this time, and take off the 2 decimal places so it's a little cleaner looking. And then so I've changed my format, leaving it with sum for now, and I'm going to click OK. And so you can see and spread my data out a little bit so you can see it better. The accounting format throws the dollar signs all the way to the left in each column. So in the grand total, for instance, so we have the dollar signs lined up on the left. That's one of the features of the accounting format, as opposed to currency, which just puts it right up next to the numbers. The accounting kind of looks neater and more formal. If you're an accountant, it might make a difference too. So one other thing before we move on, we do have about 10 minutes left. One thing we didn't look at yet is the count option. So value field settings under the drop-down for sum of price, or I can go up to the ribbon, find the value field, the field settings in the active field. And I'm going to change it to count. And I need to change the number format to general, and click OK, and click OK again. Now I have a simple count of the vehicles on my lot. And let's say I want to put the type in front of the brand, so I can get my car totals on the top and the SUV totals. I can pivot my data easily by clicking and dragging. I always like to resize these columns so that they're parallel, or that they're similarly sized. There were some other fields here. Well, I think maybe that's enough. for today. On these basics of pivot tables. It's kind of a lot to absorb. Oh, I know what I forgot. So right now we don't have the filter. I'm gonna take the brand up into the filter, and so currently this is I've got a count with my type of vehicle and the years. I'm gonna filter out, I'm just gonna uncheck Ford and just look at Toyotas right now. I'm gonna click OK. Now you see you have Toyota listed here on the filter group. And this is my totals for the Toyotas on my lot. I've got 22 total, 10 cars, 5 SUVs, and 5 2013 Toyota cars, and 5 2014 Toyota cars. So there's another way to display a filter, and that is what is called a slicer. And so going back to the Analyze tab on the ribbon, my pivot table tools ribbon, there's a filter group. A slicer is a visual filter. So I'm going to insert a filter. I'm going to I can insert multiple slicers, one for each category, one for each column category in my data. So I can do brand, I could do year. Let's just do those two for now. Okay, now I've got these boxes with my data represented. I can resize these as I want. I can make them much smaller since I've only got 2 categories in each aspect in each category. Lost the heading there. Okay, so we have got year, and so now you can see my filter now has a visual representation by this box that says brand. And I also have a filter for the year now. So if I, now here's where I can use the control to select both brands. So I have Ford's now, so you see the brand filter changed to all, because these are both highlighted. And I can just click on one or the other to select those, and my data automatically changes. The same with the year. So I can put on just 2013, and so this is only showing Fords, my 2013 Fords right now. One result of that is that I've got a duplication in my table. So if I wanted to print this out, this would not be a great format because I have duplicated data. It's not the most elegant appearance because I'm only showing 2013. My grand total is the same as the 2013 total. So if I check, I'm going to hold down Control and add 2014 back. Now I've got my 2014 again. So that is slicers. A slicer is a visual representation of a filter. And I can click and drag these around. I can click them and delete them. I'm going to delete the year, and I can take the brand filter out, but I still have my slicer. So that's a little more elegant way of doing it. the advantage of the slide of the filter was that it listed what was being filtered up above. So I'm going to put the brand back into filter. So when I click on Ford, it says Ford here at the top, so that it's like a heading of what this data represents. So we just have a couple minutes. The last thing I want to show you, let's go back to change the value field settings to sum with currency format, 0 decimal places, click OK. Oh, I need to, oh, didn't I change that? Okay, there we go. Now I've got the sum of price, and I've still got my brand filter. And let's see, I think I left the year filter on there. And I'm gonna select I got all my brands and got my sum of price. The last thing to show is I can insert a pivot chart here, which is just a chart representing your pivot table. So I can, we'll just go ahead and do the basic column chart. I can make it a little smaller so it fits on the page. We can move our brand slicer down to the side and bring our table up, maybe make it a little bigger. And here's a neat sort of visual representation of why they call it a pivot table, because it's really easy to pivot. I can add the model to the rows, and suddenly I've got, you notice my pivot chart immediately updated to show all the model names, and I can just click and drag that away to take it out. I can put the brand back, take the filter off and put it on top of the rows. Now I have Fords and Toyotas separated and by type within each one. I've got filters built into the pivot chart, so I can click there and select my car, truck, SUV. I can zero in on whatever data I'm looking for. So that's it for our pivot tables today. I've got some Excel shortcuts in the PowerPoint, and here is again, some books, 2 books, and some Excel, Discover Microsoft Excel DVDs. I've got them here. They're available at your Wichita Public Library, at the Advanced Learning Library, in fact, and they're all here available right now. You can place them on hold by clicking through on the link here. Click on the call number link, and that should open up that. Again, I will post in the chat. I have links to the YouTube videos of the last 2 classes on sorting and filtering and formulas and functions. 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 And formulas and func And so that's it.